If you've ever felt like someone's presence in your life had the power to rewrite your reality, to bend your thoughts, to control your emotions without you even realizing it, then you already know the quiet terror of being tethered to a narcissist. For years, perhaps, you navigated their moods, their manipulations, their endless games of blame and charm, always wondering if one more apology, one more effort, one more compromise could finally bring understanding or peace. But what if the truth is far more profound than confrontation? What if the only way to truly regain yourself is not by fighting them, not by proving them wrong, not by chasing them, but by stepping entirely out of their orbit, reclaiming your inner authority, and realizing that the power you've been seeking was inside you all along? This is a journey not of vengeance, but of liberation, a slow, deliberate ascension from reaction to sovereignty, from dependence to clarity, from chaos to peace. And it is far more destabilizing to them than any argument, because it forces them to confront something they have spent a lifetime avoiding: the reality that they never held the power you always possessed. One of the most psychologically destabilizing experiences a narcissist can endure is the collapse of the narrative they've painstakingly constructed about themselves and their place in your life. This isn't merely a blow to their pride or ego, it's a fundamental fracture in the very architecture of their identity. Narcissists don't experience reality as most of us do. They exist within a psychological theater where they are perpetually the central figure, the indispensable protagonist around whom all others orbit. But that theater only functions if everyone else consents to play the roles scripted for them. And for a long time you did, whether consciously or unconsciously, reinforcing their story, their sense of omnipotence, and their belief in the absolute necessity of their presence. For years, perhaps, you navigated this psychological drama carefully. You defended, rationalized, and explained yourself, even when logic and fairness were against you. You minimized your needs, weathered unpredictable emotional storms, and adapted to their whims in the faint hope that something might shift, that one day their love, their validation would align with the reality of your experience. Yet over time, a subtler but more profound transformation occurred. The balance of power shifted without fanfare. You stopped participating in the illusion. The emotional control, perceptual manipulation, and even the dictation of what constituted truth in your relationship no longer held sway. Your detachment became the silent lever that destabilized the entire narrative, revealing that the empire of their self-concept was built on the fragile sands of your compliance. The core of the narcissist's fear lies in recognition, the acknowledgement that their power is entirely contingent upon your agreement to see them as powerful, indispensable, and exceptional. They twist logic, rewrite history, downplay your suffering, and amplify their own wounds, all to maintain the illusion of irreplaceability. But illusions are fragile. The moment you stop validating them, the intricate construct they rely upon begins to unravel. It is not dramatic at first. It is often subtle, a quiet erosion rather than a public spectacle. Yet it is devastating because it cuts at the foundation of their identity. When you withdraw psychological affirmation, the narcissist is confronted with an existential threat, the possibility that they may never have been as central, as commanding, or as necessary as they always believed. This collapse is rarely immediate. Initially, it is masked by a familiar defensive storm: rage, blame-shifting, dismissiveness, or strategic indifference. Beneath that chaos, however, lies a deeper terror, the creeping realization that the story they've told themselves, the narrative that defined their identity and justified their treatment of others, might be entirely false. This is where the interplay between identity and narrative becomes crucial. Humans are inherently storied creatures. We understand ourselves and our place in the world through narrative coherence, by recalling our actions, attachments, and trials. For the narcissist, that story is fabricated, grandiose, and meticulously controlled. A crack in it is experienced not just as a disappointment, but as a psychological annihilation. When you stop reacting, when you no longer occupy the role they assigned to you, they are left on a barren stage. They may scramble to fill it, projecting onto someone else, attempting to replicate the same dynamic with a new target. But nothing can replace the presence of someone who truly saw them, the person who understood both their vulnerabilities and their constructed self-image. Your departure forces them to reckon with an uncomfortable truth. The story they've been performing, the identity they've wielded to manipulate and dominate, was never real. The narrative that once provided structure, meaning, and purpose is revealed as hollow. Your absence exposes the vacuum at the heart of their persona, a void they can no longer ignore. The ensuing disorientation is profound. For the narcissist, identity has always been relational. It exists only in reflection, mirrored through the eyes of others. Your presence sustained their false self, gave it weight, and legitimized its existence. The moment you leave, not in rage but with calm clarity, that scaffolding collapses. Your exit doesn't merely signify abandonment, it signifies the end of the illusion. You leave without explanation, without pleading for acknowledgement, without performing any spectacle of confrontation. And in that dignified silence lies the most potent truth, that their identity was never independent, never authentic, and now cannot withstand the absence of your validation. Emotional detachment, deceptively simple in appearance, becomes a weapon of existential force. To a narcissist, it represents a confrontation with reality that they are ill-equipped to handle. For the first time, the story they believed about themselves is confronted with the absence of audience, the withdrawal of affirmation, and the recognition that their omnipotence is illusory. There is no narrative to manipulate, no perception to control, and no emotional leverage to exploit. They are left facing themselves, stripped of the context that gave their identity shape. And in that stripped-down encounter with their own reflection, the full magnitude of their fragility emerges. A quiet, relentless, and irrevocable confrontation with truth that no defense mechanism, no rage, and no manipulation can undo. But in the realm of narcissistic dynamics, emotional detachment is far more than a simple absence of feeling. It is profoundly subversive because it represents mastery over your inner world. It is what happens when you stop reacting, when your emotions are no longer available as tools for manipulation, leverage, or control. Every outburst, every attempt to provoke you loses its potency. And when a narcissist recognizes that they no longer have access to your inner emotional landscape, that's when their sense of dominance begins to crumble. Control, after all, is sustained by access. Without it, their power evaporates. The silence of detachment cuts deeper than confrontation because it signals that the stage they once dominated is no longer theirs. Narcissists do not merely seek attention, which would be a superficial reading of their needs. What they crave is far more intimate and profound. Your emotional engagement in its entirety. Your highs, your lows, your frustrations, your moments of despair, and your sparks of hope. All of these reactions serve as proof that you are still tethered to them. Your anger and your tears, your impatience or pleading, are interpreted as validation that their world remains central to yours. Emotional detachment, then, becomes threatening not because you have left physically, but because you have withdrawn internally. The cord that once connected you has been severed, and with it, their ability to orchestrate your emotional state disappears entirely. True emotional detachment is neither coldness nor indifference. That is numbness, a survival mechanism that still implies unresolved pain. Detachment, on the other hand, is clarity. It is the conscious decision to see the narcissist for who they are, not who they pretended to be, and not the person you once wished they could become. It is a refusal to project empathy onto illusions. Instead, you observe with precision, without judgment, without bitterness, and without need for reaction. You are present, but your presence is no longer a tool for their narrative. It is a quiet, impenetrable force that communicates autonomy and sovereignty without a word. and this clarity is profoundly disarming for the narcissist. When a narcissist realizes they can no longer elicit the reactions they rely upon, their response is often subtle but calculated. They may become unexpectedly charming, apologetic, or seemingly self-aware. They may appear to recognize your worth, even flaunt it, as if awakened to some newfound insight. But these behaviors are rarely genuine. They are defensive, strategic, and desperate attempts to regain a lost foothold. What they are truly reacting to is not reconciliation, but the collapse of their control. Emotional detachment shifts the rules. No longer are they orchestrating the dance. You are defining the rhythm. And this reversal of power is terrifying because it undermines the foundation of their self-concept, the illusion that they are indispensable. The manifestations of this loss are subtle yet revealing. The narcissist tests boundaries, probes for emotional responses, attempts to evoke guilt, nostalgia, or fear. They look for any flicker of re-engagement, and when it doesn't come, when your response is calm, consistent, and untethered to their manipulation, they are left with nothing. Your detachment communicates a fundamental truth they cannot control. Your autonomy is complete. Your emotional resources are your own, and their significance at your expense has evaporated. This is not vengeance. There is no spectacle, no dramatic confrontation. It is quiet, steady, and immovable, and therein lies its power. What you are experiencing is individuation, the psychological process of becoming whole, autonomous, and self-integrated. Emotional detachment is the act of reclaiming your authority to define reality, value, and acceptable behavior, rather than orbiting someone else's dysfunction. In doing so, you deny the narcissist their deepest craving, relevance at your expense. They are accustomed to extremes, adoration or fury, worship or abandonment. But your quiet self-possession speaks a language they cannot interpret, cannot twist, and cannot manipulate. Indifference, in its purest form, is a mirror reflecting back the truth of their limitations. And in that reflection, transformation occurs, not in them, but in you. At last, you are no longer dancing to the rhythm of their chaos. You are composing your own cadence, guided by your values, clarity, and emotional sovereignty. This is when they finally confront the reality they sought to avoid. The version of you they attempted to control no longer exists. It is not merely a loss of attention or influence. It is an existential displacement of the false narratives they built around themselves. The realization arrives too late. By the time they understand the magnitude of your detachment, the person they tried to dominate has already transcended the stage they once controlled, leaving only a hollow echo of the story they once wielded as power. You've evolved, you've ascended, you've reached a state where their tactics are no longer relevant, no longer effective, and no longer intimidating. Emotional detachment, once a deliberate practice, has now become your natural state. It is not an act or a temporary posture. It is a reflection of your actual psychological reality. And in that clarity, the narcissist begins to understand, perhaps for the first time, that the power dynamic they relied upon has ended. Not because you confronted them with force, not because you outmaneuvered them in drama, but because you no longer needed to. By stepping out of the stage they controlled, you rendered their manipulations powerless, and in doing so, you achieved a victory they cannot comprehend. There is something existentially threatening to a narcissist about true independence. Not the superficial kind, the ability to pay bills, manage schedules, or live without them, but the deep internal independence that emerges from a stable identity, a coherent set of values, and an integrated understanding of self. This form of autonomy exposes the cracks in their own facade, highlighting the emptiness they have long avoided confronting. Narcissists are terrified of exposure, not necessarily exposure of secrets, but exposure of the fundamental lack that underpins their entire persona. Your stability, your grounded sense of self, and your refusal to validate their distorted narrative becomes a mirror they cannot bear to look into. This matters because narcissists are not self-sustaining. Their sense of identity is fragile, inflated, brittle, and dependent entirely on external reflection. They require others, often empathetic and conscientious people, to affirm their value, reinforce their control, and maintain the illusion of significance. Remove that reflection, and their carefully constructed persona begins to dissolve. Beneath it lies a raw, vulnerable self, one filled with shame, inadequacy, and unresolved pain. When you achieve true independence, when you no longer seek validation, no longer chase, and no longer react predictably, you disrupt the entire system that sustains them. Your presence becomes intolerable, not because you have done wrong, but because you no longer perform the role they require for survival. Most narcissists build a false self to navigate the world, a facade designed to impress, dominate, and intimidate. But this false self is hollow. It conceals the frightened, neglected, and chronically unworthy real self, often shaped by early trauma or abandonment. When someone no longer participates in their game, someone who doesn't seek their approval, doesn't chase their affection, and doesn't need them to feel complete, that person represents a profound threat. Not a violent threat, but an existential one. You embody something the narcissist has disowned: wholeness, integrity, and emotional self-sufficiency. Confronted with this reflection, they are forced to face the absence within themselves, the void they have spent a lifetime hiding from. Your independence is more than a personal triumph. It is a psychological revelation for the narcissist. By existing as self-sufficient, emotionally balanced, and internally anchored, you reveal the limitations of their control. Every reaction you withheld, every boundary you held, every moment of clarity you maintained communicates a truth they cannot manipulate. Your autonomy was never theirs to threaten. In this realization lies their destabilization. To admit that you no longer need them is also to admit that they never truly possessed the power they assumed. They are confronted with a fundamental absence within themselves, and the recognition of that void often triggers either escalation or retreat, because dismantling their defensive identity is far too painful and destabilizing. You rise, they fall. Your sovereignty, once a quiet internal practice, now becomes a force that redefines the dynamics between you. For the narcissist, this confrontation is unbearable because it is not a challenge they can control or predict. Rarely, some narcissists may respond with introspection, growth, or attempts at genuine change, but these cases are exceptions. More often, the realization of their inadequacy provokes intensification of old patterns: manipulation, charm, blame, or withdrawal. In essence, your detachment has broken the rules they once relied upon. You no longer orbit their drama. You have created your own gravity, and in doing so, you illuminate a truth they cannot reconcile, leaving them to face the emptiness their own ego has protected them from for far too long. Anything but look inward. That was always their instinct, their default. Narcissists are masters at projection, at blaming, at deflecting. But that is no longer your concern. You've made a shift, a tectonic shift that alters the landscape of your inner life. You no longer exist in their psychological orbit. You no longer seek validation from their approval. No longer measure yourself by their reactions. No longer tether your sense of self to their shifting whims. Instead, you have found meaning elsewhere, perhaps in purpose, in faith, in community, or even in the simple act of speaking truth. Whatever the source, your identity now exists beyond their reach, immutable and self-contained. And that is when they begin to crumble. Not because you attacked them, not because you exposed them publicly, not because you sought vengeance, but because you withdrew the illusion that they were central to your existence. You stopped feeding the lie. You stopped orbiting their chaos, reacting to their manipulations, and bending yourself to accommodate their false narrative. That absence, your silence, your calm, your peace, your emotional distance, is what forces them to reckon with the truth they have avoided at all costs. It is a truth they may never have faced before. They were never the source of your strength. You always were. For a narcissist, this is profoundly destabilizing. Their sense of self is constructed entirely around dominance, control, and the perception of importance. When confronted with someone whose strength is internal, whose identity is anchored and self-sufficient, the entire illusion collapses. But for you, the experience is liberating. This is the moment you reclaim yourself fully, reclaim your time, your energy, your attention, and your emotional sovereignty. It is the moment you stop measuring your progress by their reactions and begin to measure it by the growth of your own life, by your own standards, by your own truth. And in this reclamation, the world begins to expand. What emerges is something remarkable, a life that is creative rather than reactive, intentional rather than defensive, resilient rather than fragile. A life rooted not in fear, not in appeasement, but in clarity, purpose, and authenticity. You have built an internal fortress that cannot be shaken by external manipulations. You no longer exist for their drama, and yet your presence carries far more weight than it ever did when it was tied to their whims. This is true empowerment. You are no longer a participant in someone else's psychological theater. You are the author of your own story, the steward of your own identity, and the guardian of your own peace. So here is the final truth and the call to courage. The day you no longer need them to see your worth is the day they finally see the emptiness within themselves. And this revelation is powerful not because it punishes or humiliates, but because it reflects a clarity they can neither fabricate nor manipulate. You have moved from reaction to creation, from dependence to sovereignty. You have stepped out of the shadows of their narrative and into the light of your own truth. In that light, your life is no longer dictated by their illusions. And in that liberation, you finally find yourself whole, unshakable, and profoundly free. At its core, this is about reclaiming the self when someone else has attempted to define, control, or diminish it. Narcissists thrive on external validation. They construct their identity like a fragile tower of mirrors, each reflection maintained by the reactions of those around them. Your emotional engagement, your highs and lows, your anger, your sadness, all of these serve as proof that the mirror still reflects them. Emotional detachment disrupts that system. It isn't an absence of feeling, but a mastery of it. By no longer reacting to their provocations, you withdraw the energy that sustains their identity, and this triggers a kind of existential destabilization. Emotional detachment doesn't mean coldness or indifference. Those are responses of numbness or avoidance, still rooted in unresolved attachment. True detachment arises from clarity and self-integration. It's a recognition of who you are, what you value, and where your boundaries lie. When you detach, you stop projecting hope, empathy, or expectation onto the narcissist. You observe them without judgment, without bitterness, without reactivity. This creates a new dynamic. You are no longer an actor in their drama. You are a witness to it, anchored in your own truth. The paradox is that your quiet, consistent presence, or absence, is far more powerful than confrontation, rage, or argument. It communicates autonomy in a language they cannot manipulate, control, or twist. The impact on the narcissist is profound because their sense of self is entirely externalized. They cannot sustain identity internally. It relies on reflection from others. When you stop reflecting them, when you no longer validate the grand narrative they've built around themselves, the illusion begins to crack. They are confronted with the reality of their emptiness, a void they've spent their entire lives avoiding. They may attempt charm, apologies, or manipulation, but these are defensive strategies, not genuine transformation. The truth you embody, the clarity, strength, and independence, is in itself unassailable. You no longer orbit their chaos. You have created your own center, and that shift is both liberating for you and destabilizing for them. Independence in this context is deeply existential. It is more than functional autonomy or the ability to survive without someone. It is an internal, integrated sense of self. You no longer measure your worth externally. You no longer rely on their approval or reactions to define your reality. This creates what can feel like a seismic shift in relational dynamics. The narcissist, accustomed to extremes, adoration, anger, dependence, or chaos, encounters something they cannot decode: quiet, unshakable self-possession. This form of independence threatens them not because it punishes them, but because it exposes the limitations of their own constructed self. The absence of validation reflects back a reality they cannot manipulate, and in that reflection, they face a truth they may never have been ready to confront. The psychological liberation you experience is as much about growth as it is about self-preservation. It is a journey from reactivity to intentionality, from external dependence to inner authority. You reclaim your time, attention, and energy. You move from a life defined by responding to others' chaos to one shaped by your own values, creativity, and purpose. The subtle, consistent act of emotional detachment reshapes your internal world. It allows you to operate with clarity, resilience, and intentionality. It allows you to live fully, to define your own narrative, and to cultivate relationships that are reciprocal rather than exploitative. In the quiet mastery of your own emotions, you become unassailable, and the narcissist is left to confront what they cannot repair: the absence of their control and the presence of your strength. Your detachment, then, is not simply a defense mechanism. It is a profound form of empowerment. It is the conscious act of choosing yourself over the drama, clarity over manipulation, and sovereignty over dependence. In this space, your growth becomes a mirror reflecting what they cannot possess, what they cannot emulate, and what they may never achieve: true internal strength. And in that reflection, the full psychological shift occurs. You rise, they falter, not through confrontation, not through aggression, but through the quiet, consistent truth of your self-possession. This is the ultimate transformation, one that redefines the relationship entirely and establishes a life that is resilient, grounded, and authentically free. Ultimately, what you've done is far more than end a relationship, resist manipulation, or assert boundaries. What you've accomplished is the reclamation of your own psyche. You've moved from a state of reactivity, where someone else's chaos dictated your emotions, to a state of clarity, where your internal compass is sovereign. This is the essence of emotional mastery: the recognition that your value, your power, and your peace were never contingent on their approval, never dependent on their validation, and never something they could grant or revoke. The narcissist's power over you was always an illusion, sustained by your participation in the story they wrote. By stepping out of that narrative, by refusing to feed their illusions, you did not just escape. They were exposed to a truth they could never fabricate: that you always held your own authority. This shift is not just external, it is deeply internal, existential even. You have severed the cords that tethered your sense of self to someone else's chaos. You have withdrawn the energy that once fueled their identity, and in doing so, you have created a vacuum they cannot fill. Your silence, your peace, your steady presence, your refusal to react, speaks a language they cannot manipulate. It communicates power not as domination, but as internal coherence. It communicates freedom not as rebellion, but as mastery. And while they scramble, lash out, or retreat, it does not affect you. You are no longer a participant in their illusions, no longer a character in their theater. You are the author of your own story, the guardian of your own reality, and the steward of your own peace. The liberation you experience through this process is profound because it is rooted in something no one can take away: clarity, self-possession, and independence. You have stepped into a life that is intentional rather than reactive, creative rather than defensive, resilient rather than fragile. You no longer orbit the chaos of someone else's ego, but instead move through your own life with purpose, integrity, and vision. And in that presence, the narcissist, for all their cunning and manipulation, is forced to confront a truth they have long avoided. They cannot control what has been freed. They cannot reach into a mind that is anchored in itself. They cannot manipulate emotions that are steady, boundaries that are firm, or identity that is whole.